All right, good afternoon. In a statement we released a bit earlier today, the Secretary General said he was deeply grateful to Michelle Bachelet for her relentless service to the United Nations as High Commissioner for Human Rights. This, of course, follows her announcement that she would not be seeking a second term. From her earliest days in Chile, with enormous personal sacrifice, she has been on the front lines of the human rights struggle all her life. In all she has done, Michelle Bachelet lives and breathes human rights. She has moved the needle in an extremely challenging political context, and she has made profound difference for people around the globe. The Secretary General said she continues to have his full support. Mr. Guterres will always value her wisdom, strong voice, and success in ensuring that human rights underpin the actions of the United Nations. And in just a few minutes, we expect the head of our peacekeeping mission in Mali, El Gassim Wan, to speak to you at the Security Council stakeout. That'll probably be around 12:45 to 1 o'clock. We will let you know. In his remarks to council members this morning, Mr. Wan reiterated the mission's commitment to continue its efforts to support a consensual way out of the current crisis in Mali. And his remarks were shared with you. Noeleen Heyzer, the special envoy for Myanmar, today briefed the General Assembly by video conference. She said the political crisis unleashed on February 1st of 2021 has opened new front lines that had long been at peace. Today, she warned more than 14 million people, or 1/4 of the entire population of Myanmar, urgently require humanitarian assistance. This crisis has resulted in collapsing state institutions, significantly disrupting critical social and economic infrastructure such as health, education, banking, finance, food security, and employment, while increasing the criminality and illicit activities. Ms. Heyzer said the number of people living in poverty has doubled in the last 5 years to encompass half of the population of Myanmar. Armed conflict has now become the norm, she said, and distrust among stakeholders is only deepened. But on a more positive note, she said, although the situation remains fragile, there's been a gradual improvement of intercommunal relationships and economic social integration of Rohingya in Rakhine State. Turning to Yemen, our resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator, David Gressley, announced today that the launch of a social media campaign to raise the necessary funds to start the emergency operation to transfer the oil from the FSO Safar to a safe and temporary vessel. Following the Saudi Arabia's announcement of a $10 million pledge on June 12th, and the U.S.'s announcement that it is working towards $10 million contribution, we now have 3/4 of the $80 million required to start the emergency phase of the operation. Meanwhile, on the political end, the Special Envoy for Yemen, Hans Grunberg, visited Sana'a last week to discuss, among other issues, the proposal for a phased reopening of key roads in Taiz and other governorates. Mr. Grunberg is expecting an imminent response from Sana'a on the proposal that the UN has submitted. The UN proposal takes into consideration various concerns expressed by both sides during discussions that started in the Jordanian capital Amman last month. As all elements of the truce, the opening of the road is a measure to alleviate the suffering of Yemenis, as well as bring about some sense of normalization and facilitate freedom of movement for Yemeni civilians. Mr. Grunberg remains committed to working with the parties to implement all elements of the truce to continue delivering its tangible benefits to Yemeni women, men, and children, as well as engaging on next steps to consolidate the opportunities provided by the truce to put Yemen on a path to peace. And from Ukraine, we and our humanitarian partners are extremely alarmed over reports of intense fighting in Severodonetsk and surrounding areas, which is severely impacting men, women, and children who remain in the area. According to our partners, the shelling and clashes have led to civilian casualties, with damage to dozens of homes and critical infrastructure, including water and power systems. We do know that thousands of people still in Severodonetsk, including hundreds who are sheltering in the bunkers of the Azot plant, as we are informed by our partners on the ground. People there have no access to piped water or electricity, and many told our humanitarian colleagues that they have nowhere to go. In addition, some 30,000 people are believed to be in neighboring Lysychansk and surrounding villages, which are also enduring constant shelling and bombardment and clashes. And our humanitarian partners also tell us that the situation is also of great concern in non-government controlled areas of the Donetsk Oblast, these where daily shellings and bombardments have led to civilian casualties. Areas very close to UN facilities have been affected by the fighting. This morning, for example, a market and an apartment building were hit in Donetsk when a shell landed in populated areas in the center of the city, 50 meters from the UN compound. Insecurity and bureaucratic obstacles have prevented us from providing life-saving assistance in those regions. The last time we sent a convoy with supplies to Severodonetsk was on April 5th, carrying supplies to more than 17,000 people. In Donetsk, we, along with our humanitarian partners, have engaged on several occasions with the parties to facilitate our access and make sure we would send much-needed relief items, but we have not been able to succeed. We again stress that all our partners to the conflict must respect international humanitarian law and protect civilians. It is imperative that all violations against civilians cease immediately, and that people caught up in areas of heavy fighting are allowed to leave safely in the direction of their choosing. Parties to the conflict must also allow and facilitate rapid and unimpeded passage of humanitarian relief so we can make sure people impacted by nearly 3 months of war can receive the support they so desperately need. Turning to Syria, yesterday a UN interagency cross-line convoy crossed from Aleppo to Sarmada in the country's northwest. 14 trucks carrying food, medicine, and other supplies for 43,000 people. This is the 5th cross-line convoy that was allowed in line with the UN Interagency Operation Plan and also with Security Council Resolution 2585. Humanitarian conditions are deteriorating in the northwest due to the continued fighting in a deepening economic crisis. More than 4 million people in the area rely on aid to meet their most basic needs. And 80% of those people are women and children. While the cross-line operations are critical, they cannot replace the massive UN cross-border operation, which reached 2.4 million Syrians every month with vital aid, including food and vaccines. And from northern Ethiopia, we, along with our partners, are continuing to provide humanitarian aid across Tigray, Afar, and Amhara. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that food distribution is ongoing, with more than 900,000 people have been reached since June 1st. Between April, when aid was delivered by road convoys, Between April, when aid delivery by road convoys resumed, and last week, more than 65,000 metric tons of food aid were delivered to Tigray, but more assistance is needed to meet all of the needs of the people. Currently, just over 1/3 of people targeted have received food aid in the current round of distribution, which began in October. Fuel supplies also continue to be limited and are impacting our ability to get food to people who need it. While food is the largest share of aid going into Tigray, other supplies such as water, sanitation, shelter, nutrition have also been getting into Tigray, both through air and road. Humanitarian needs are also extremely high in the Afar and Amhara regions. In Amhara, more than 10 million people have received food assistance since late December, more than 992,000 people since late February in Afar. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that some areas near the border between Amhara and Tigray remained hard to reach for aid workers. Earlier this month, partners were able to carry out an assessment of needs in this area for the first time since December. We continue to call for unfettered access for aid workers to reach all men, women, and children in need across northern Ethiopia. And staying in the same region, in Kenya, our humanitarian colleagues say the devastating drought affecting the Horn of Africa has caused severe food insecurity and malnutrition in many parts of the country. There are now 4.1 million people in Kenya facing crisis or emergency level food insecurity, up from 3.5 million just a few months ago. Malnutrition is also increasing at an alarming rate. At least 942,000 children under the age of 5 and some 134,000 pregnant or lactating women urgently need treatment. That brings the total number of people severely food insecure across Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya, the three Horn of Africa countries hardest hit by the drought, to at least 18.4 million people who are food insecure. Without additional resources, we and our partners will be forced to make impossible choices. As you heard from the humanitarian coordinator for Somalia, Adam Abdelmullah, last week, we face real or imminent threat of large-scale loss of life. OCHA is calling for $180.7 million to respond to the highest priority of need, and we urge donors to contribute as quickly as possible. And also in the Horn of Africa, in Djibouti, our team led by the resident coordinator, Jose Barahona, continues to support authorities in responding to the ongoing food and water crisis in the country, with 13% of the population in severe food insecurity, the number projected to increase to 16% by December. Our team allotted $2 million for the emergency humanitarian funds and launched an ongoing response focusing on supporting the most vulnerable people in rural communities. On the health front, we vaccinated more than 150,000 children under the age of 5 as part of our national polio vaccination campaign, reaching 95% coverage throughout the country in the past 3 months. Turning to Libya, the UN mission there over the weekend expressed its concern about the Friday night clashes between armed groups in Tripoli, which endangered the lives of civilians, and the mobilization of armed groups and heavy weapons in areas surrounding Tripoli. The mission said that the clashes happened during extremely sensitive period, which includes the talks that began yesterday in Cairo that are aimed at establishing a constitutional framework to enable the holding of national elections as soon as possible. The UN mission calls on Libya political and security actors to exercise maximum restraint, demonstrate responsible leadership, and address all disputes, both at the local and national levels, through dialogue. Opening the talks in Cairo yesterday, Stephanie Williams, the Secretary General Special Advisor for Libya, said the final round comes at a critical juncture at a time when the Libyan people are exhausted. She told the Libyan representatives that they have a real opportunity, indeed a solemn responsibility, to give them hope, to provide a pathway towards elections within a firm constitutional framework. The UN Population Fund today announced in a virtual ceremony the winners of the Population Award. The award is the award to an individual this year will go to Emma Theophilus, a 25-year-old parliamentarian from Namibia, for her work advocating for women's empowerment and adolescent sexual reproductive health. She's the youngest ever recipient of the award. We congratulate her. And an institutional award was given to the National Population and Family Planning Board for the Republic of Indonesia, a non-ministerial government agency that formulates national policies, implements family planning initiatives, and mentors experts in the field of population. More information online. Just a couple of things I want to read into the record. One is the statement we issued on Friday evening, or Saturday, I think, on the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We expressed our concern at the deteriorating security situation in the country's east, and we reiterated our call on all armed groups to immediately cease all forms of violence. In the note, we welcomed and expressed our support for the ongoing national and regional political efforts to accompany the disarmament of armed groups, and also welcomed the nomination by the African Union of Angola's president, João Lourenço, to diffuse tensions between the DRC and Rwanda. Finally, we expressed our concern about the reports of increased hate speech in the country against some particular communities, including in the context of the M23's resurgence. Don't worry, James. We'll get to you. As part of our efforts to combat hate speech, the mission's radio station, Radio Okapi, hosted a dialogue a few days ago with the director of the Joint Human Rights Office, Abdulaziz Thio, and Patrick Muyaya, the Congolese Minister of Communication and Media and government spokesperson. During the dialogue, they launched an appeal against hate speech. more online. And also just want to remind you that the Deputy Secretary General is now back in New York after having visited Kyrgyzstan on the 10th and 11th of June as part of her trip to Central Asia. She met on Friday with President Japarov and Chair of the Cabinet Minister, Alikbek Japarov. She delivered remarks on the signature ceremony for the new cooperation framework between the UN and Kyrgyzstan, and that's for 2023-2027. Ms. Mohammed and President Japarov discussed many of the global issues in the context of recovery from the pandemic. They spoke about the SDGs. They spoke also about the UN support for the country in developing an inclusive economy that puts people at the center and recognizes the rights of women to lead and part of the growth. They also discussed the importance of stronger regional dialogue and Kyrgyzstan's role in ensuring peace and stability in the region. On Saturday, Ms. Mohammed traveled to Kyrgyzstan's mountainous region of Narin to have an aerial view of the climate change-impacted glaciers that feed vital cross-border rivers in Central Asia, especially in the Fergana Valley. The Deputy Secretary General also discussed with local youth leaders their ongoing collective efforts to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And this just in. Okay, and also I was asked about, I think over the weekend, about issues regarding the airport in Damascus, and I can tell you the Secretary General is concerned about the reported strikes on Damascus International Airport on June 10th, which resulted in damage to runways and airport closure. The Secretary General reminds all concerned that directing attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure is strictly prohibited under international humanitarian law. He's troubled by what appears to be an escalation of violent actions and hostile rhetoric across the region in recent weeks, and cautions that the risk of miscalculation could lead to a broader conflict in an already volatile region. He calls on all concerned to exercise utmost restraint and avoid further escalation. The Secretary General further reiterates our readiness to assist member states in resolving their differences through dialogue, and he stands ready to exert his good offices in that regard. Today is the International Day of Albinism Awareness. This year's theme is United in Making Our Voices Heard. The aim is to encourage and celebrate unity among groups of persons with albinism and amplify their voices and visibility across all areas of life. Tomorrow, my guest will be Afsan Khan, UNICEF's Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia. She'll provide an update on how children are being impacted by the war in Ukraine. She's just returned from a mission there last week. And also tomorrow at 11 a.m., there'll be a hybrid briefing here on the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disability. Speakers will include Ambassador Jukka Salovara, President of COSP15 and the Permanent Representative of Finland, if I'm not mistaken, along with Jose Vieira, the International Disability Alliance Advocacy Director. I've spoken enough. James.
Yeah. Can I ask you more about High Commissioner Bachelet and the fact she's not seeking a second term? You say the Secretary-General is deeply grateful for her, but as you're aware, she's come under a great deal of criticism, particularly in recent weeks after her trip to China for pulling her punches. And these criticisms, not just from journalists and human rights activists, it's coming from the US administration, it's coming from the European Parliament. Is that criticism going to be taken on board by the Secretary-General as he considers who should have the job next time?
I guess the short answer is no. The Secretary-General, first of all, I think was very clear in his support for Ms. Bachelet, including her recent trip to China. He will seek out the best possible candidate to be a strong voice in defense of human rights around the world.
And what about the report? Because there is this report that was over 4 years ago. They announced they were going to start doing this report. We were told at the end of last year, September last year, that the report had been completed, and yet the report has not been published. Will the Secretary-General be urging the High Commissioner to publish the report before she leaves office? Because if you're going to be strong on human rights, clearly you have to be transparent, and burying a report doesn't seem very transparent.
I think that is a sovereign decision that the Human Rights Commissioner will make. The Secretary-General is not in the business of telling her what to do.
And one final one: when did she tell him that she wasn't going to seek a second term? Has he had some warning? Is he going
I mean,
is he going to be able to find someone on day one?
He was aware. I saw him extremely briefly. I had a very quick conversation with him this morning. I didn't get a chance to ask him exactly when he found out. We will do our best to ensure that somebody is there on day one, but we all know the challenges of sometimes senior.
But he doesn't have to
appointments.
consult anyone on this, does he?
No,
It's just his decision.
According to Security Council resolution, the General Assembly resolution, the Secretary General, the High Commissioner is appointed by the Secretary General and approved by the General Assembly with due regard to geographical rotation for a fixed term of 4 years. Obviously, there will be interviews, there will be application. I mean, he will take the time that he needs to find the best possible person, taking in due consideration the calendar, which we cannot impact. Madame.
Thank you, Steph. I have two questions on Myanmar and a couple of follow-ups. The UN Refugee, sorry, not the Refugee Agency, the UN Envoy for Myanmar this morning also said that the refugees, particularly the youth, were being targeted by the armed groups and they were facing pressure to join them. Does the UN have any track of refugees joining the armed forces? And also, at the same briefing, the EU ambassador to the UN said they were deeply concerned that some countries continue to supply lethal weapons to the Myanmar's military. Is the UN aware of the arms flow into the country? And if so, can you tell us who these countries might be? And just to clarify, did you said that after the Saudis and the US announced $10 million each, the UN is ready to start the emergency operation? Did I get that right? And also, if you could also tell us.
Okay, I'm not 25 years old anymore, so let me try to answer what you've asked, and I may have to come back to you if you don't mind. On Myanmar, I don't think we have any hard information about weapons flows more than what's been reported in the press. I think we've had reports of refugees and people being pressurized to join armed groups. I think this really falls into what Nolene Heiser said about old fault lines being reopened, new lines of fighting being reopened, and the country basically going in reverse. Issues that we thought had been solved, especially including armed groups, are now being unsolved. With renewed fighting, sadly, as we see in many cases, comes a renewed push for armed groups to unfortunately, probably very often, force people to join their ranks, which is in itself completely unacceptable. On the Safar tanker, can you repeat your question?
The emergency operation after the Saudis and the US announced $10 million each. Is the UN ready to start that operation?
Yeah, so what we need is $80 million to start the emergency operation, which would basically involve emergency repairs to the tanker and the transfer of the oil to a temporary storage facility. So we are ready to go fairly quickly after we get that $80 million. We have 3/4 of $80 million.
Can I have one more follow-up on the Damascus airport attack? Can you tell us who carried out the strikes?
No. Sylviane.
Thank you, Stéphane. There is on the dispute over the maritime border between Israel and Lebanon, the UN coordinator for Lebanon, UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon said today that the United Nations is ready to help move the indirect negotiation on the dispute over the maritime borders between Lebanon and Israel, what can really the United Nations do to advance these negotiations?
What we can do is, should they want to work with the parties to help them find a solution through dialogues, through discussion between both sides, and we stand ready to do that. Edward, Evelyn, and then we'll go to the back.
Hi, Steph. Several questions. Should I ask them together or just maybe one by one?
I think my upper limit is 3.
All
together.
right. Okay,
All right.
so I'll first give you 3. First, a Ukrainian official, I think today, accused Russian forces who's occupying the city of Mariupol treated the residents as, quote, tied up slaves and a human shield, end of quote. The question is, does UN still have, let's say, humanitarian workers in the eastern part of Ukraine, especially in Mariupol, and can they verify this? And second, on Ukraine, is there any new development on the issue of grain and fertilizer export from Ukraine?
No, on the grain, nothing new to report except to say that we're continuing to work at it and chisel at it. On the Mariupol, I'm not aware that we have humanitarian presence, a UN marked humanitarian presence in Mariupol. I can tell you that our colleagues in Kiev are continuing discussions with all the parties involved in order to try to increase our humanitarian presence in more areas, because what is clear is that people need help.
And second, on UK and Rwanda, tomorrow there will be the first batch of 31, I think, asylum seekers and immigrations. They will take the flight to be transported to Rwanda, according to an agreement between the government of UK and Rwanda. And I just want to know, because in April, UNHCR said they firmly opposed the plan and called it against the letter and spirit of a refugee convention. So it's June, and tomorrow it will be the first batch. Is there any changing of the position from, well, first from UNHCR, and second from the Secretary General? What is his position? Thank you.
No, there's no change from UNHCR to, I think, their very clear opposition to their scheme. They put out, I think, a statement late last week as the latest court appeal was ongoing. The Secretary General fully backs the High Commissioner for Refugees in this regard.
And the one last question, it's actually a follow-up on Syria. You mentioned about the cross-border humanitarian assistance. Next month there would be an extension. Resolution vote, I guess, in the Security Council. First, are there any plans to expand the cross-line humanitarian assistance? And second, if there's a vote about the cross-border humanitarian assistance, would it? How to ask this question? Would it be important to have the border
Yes.
cross-border?
The short answer is yes. The cross-border access point, it remains critical to our ability to deliver humanitarian aid to those Syrian men and women who need it in those areas. Obviously, more crossing points are better. We've always been very clear about that. We will, of course, also continue the cross-line operations, which are also extremely important.
Any plans for that? I mean,
Sorry?
Do you know? Are there any plans for more border?
Well, I think that will be up to the member states in the resolution. Evelyn.
Thank you, Steph. Excuse me. A couple quick questions. On the UK shipping migrants to Rwanda, is there any way to stop the UK? Does anyone have any?
Well, I mean, that's really a question for UNHCR. I mean, I don't know if I can't answer that question.
All right. And secondly,
We do note that it is going through some sort of judicial process.
where in the UK?
That's what I know from reading the news.
because they're no longer on the European Council. Anyway, on Yemen, you were asked this once before, but the Washington Post had a lengthy investigation of Saudi airstrikes on in Yemen, and we wondered if they had stopped, or are they still threatened, or what has happened there?
Well, we've had, as you know, we've had a 2 months truce, which was extended,
Yes.
which was extended for another 2 months. We've had no reports of airstrikes, no reports of cross-border attacks. All of it is good news, and Mr. Grunberg is working, I think, very diligently to try to build on this success, on this step in the right direction, for the sake of people of Yemen. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. Also on Yemen, on the Safir tanker, if the $80 million were to be fully funded, are we confident that the Houthis will actually allow access to the FSO? Like, where are we in terms of the negotiations?
we have agreements with all the relevant parties. Obviously, in Yemen, as everywhere else around the world, we take things one day at a time. But our understanding is that yes, we will have the access to the ship, which is critical for us in order to avoid what we fear would be an ecological disaster.
And also on Syria, do we know where the 5 trucks, which areas they're intended for?
The cross-border, we can give you a bit
line?
more details from our OCHA colleagues.
Okay, and I also wanted to ask you, how satisfied is the Secretary General about the cross-line operations these days? It has come under a lot of criticism that aid sometimes is being diverted, it's not really reaching the areas it's supposed to reach, and all those criticism. Does he still believe it's going in a transparent and principled way?
It is going in as best as it could be, given all of the circumstances. Cross-line and cross-border aid deliveries remain critical for those men, women, and children that desperately need it.
And there are also some calls for the whole operation to move into cross-line delivery. Can you remind us just why is it important to have both?
We are able to reach a huge amount of people through cross-border. I think we've made clear for us the critical need of continued cross-border operations. We used to have many more delivery points. They were reduced. That was a decision of the Security Council. We, of course, can only abide by it and work with it. But we continue to believe that these cross-border deleveries are critical for the health and survival of so many Syrian men, women, and children. Okay, Paulina, you're up, and I think as soon as Paulina is done, we will bring Mr. Wan out to the stakeout.